The future is watching. Welcome to OpCode Virtual Summit.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm excited to present to this awesome group. I've always wanted to go to one of these conferences, so I'm just really delighted that we made it a virtual event. I tend to be a very Q&A type presenter, so I'm happy to sort of share some of the results of the Q&As that I've talked about in the past, or specifically around the venture capital space. And of course, for this group, venture capital in cybersecurity. So some really quick context just for the audience, so for the folks who don't know who I am and what I do. My name is William Lin. I'm a co-founder and a partner at a venture capital firm that's dedicated towards cybersecurity companies. We started in 2015 with a goal of raising $100 million between the three co-founders. We ultimately raised a $300 million fund, which we have invested, and we're now investing out of a $450 million fund. So what that means is, out of the $750 million dedicated towards security startups, we'll have around 40 to 50 security companies in our portfolio in a couple of years. And that gives you sort of a sense in terms of how deep and how many, how wide we're getting within cybersecurity as well. And because of the scale that we have there, we also have quite a large team, everyone with their own specific focus area. Myself, my focus area, I really enjoy finding and identifying white spaces and finding the most efficient, effective way of solving that white space, that problem, and then of course working with some of the best teams to make that a reality. So that's a quick summary on me. Now, to talk about the venture capital industry, specifically around cybersecurity, what we've seen over the past year or so are some quite huge turbulent factors, right? And so what I can do for this call is talk specifically around some key turbulent factors that have changed, the way that we think about security, the way that we work, as well. So one, of course, top of mind for everyone is COVID. How has COVID impacted the venture capital space? How has it impacted the security space as well? And so I'll spend some time talking about those two first. So first of all, around how has COVID impacted work? How in general? We're all experiencing it, and so it's pretty easy to talk about all of our individual experiences of working from home, doing video calls, catalyzing things such as this event in the digital world. But another big change that's happening with regards to enterprises because of COVID is a focus around business continuity planning. The reality is business continuity planning tends to be under the CISO and tend to be not a very important role for or function. It was typically staffed to fairly junior people in the past because people didn't think and didn't realize, and nor did I, realize like something like COVID was a possibility, forcing 100% of your workforce to work from home. And so business continuity planning has become very important, and that's created a lot of change for the CISO in a positive way, I would argue. Yes, there's a lot of triaging, figuring out how do we work in this new world. But the key positive that's happened is that we've seen a lot of alignment. CISOs and CIOs and CFOs are supposed to have a very healthy tension. CIOs are focused on bringing in the newest technology to help the company perform better. CISOs are focused on evaluating the risk of technology and the various business functions that we do to make sure that none of the things that we do as a business could accidentally harm us, whether it is financially, whether it's reputation, whether it's operations. All very important aspects for a CISO. But because of that, it's created, of course, a tension between lots of different constituents within a company. What COVID has done has changed the world in that in that way. Because of this conflict, because of this change, CIOs, CISOs, CFOs, they're all 100% all on the same page right now. They're all focused on business continuity. And what that's enabling is it's enabling everyone to think about the world in a different way. It's allowing them to let go of legacy solutions that they have been using depending on the past, but just don't work in the new world. Solutions that the CISOs have always been a little bit concerned around, so they build defense in depth around it as a way to protect and prevent those legacy unpatched systems from creating havoc in the future. Now they can move on completely and invest into either transition the application from, for instance, mainframe to public cloud, a huge transformation, or they can find new ways of securing these different solutions as well. So when we look at that alignment between CIO, CISO, and CFO, one of the places where there's very clear alignment between all three of them is in the usage of public cloud. But public cloud enables customers to have business continuity planning, right? High availability is the name of the game when it comes to economies of scale and services at the public cloud scale. On top of that, a lot of folks thought about the possibility of saving money while moving to public cloud. The reality is that it might not be saving as much as people expected, but every day they're finding more economies of scale. Every day, public cloud vendors tend to be working on reducing the cost of their solutions, and so there is a natural visibility to benefiting from that economies of scale over time, and most importantly, when we think about the latest technology that is built for scale, that is built for efficiency, a lot of that tends to be built with the public cloud world in mind. And so as this new technology that's enabling companies to move better, faster, and cheaper moves into the public cloud, naturally customers are also moving to public cloud as well, which is enabling a key transformation amongst multiple sectors within security. So transitioning now to talking about security, we talked about before about how the world has changed. We talked about, and now what has changed in security as a result of COVID. The easiest one to talk about is the topic we were just talking about, public cloud. So what is public cloud doing to the security world? It is changing the way that everyone thinks about the various categories or protections that we've always used. I'm a really big fan, and a shout out to Sunil Yu of his cyber defense matrix. It's a wise way of leveraging the NIST CSF framework, as well as adding additional details onto it, making it from a one-dimensional framework to a two-dimensional framework. And so of those 5 categories that Sunil has added to the NIST CSF, users, data, network, endpoint, identity, being able to, all of those 5 categories are going to be evolved or changed because of this transition to public cloud as well. And where do we start? If we look at the creation of the response vertical or ideal, that naturally started in the endpoint space. And concurrently, we saw, of course, network companies work towards providing a response function. We looked at identity companies look at providing a response function, and of course, endpoint companies providing a response company. And we've all clearly seen that the EDR space has been sort of the clear ahead of the pack in terms of those other various categories in terms of figuring out response. And so if we apply that same lessons learned and framework onto this transition to public cloud, it's very easy and logical to realize that that endpoints will become a key component to this transition to public cloud, and being able to get visibility, being able to respond, being able to detect are all going to be key components as the world evolves due to COVID. Another trend that we've seen even pre-COVID, but aligned with everything that we're talking about here, is this gradual digital transformation that every company is undergoing. Because companies are spending more time realizing that their consumers, their constituents, their employees are working in more and more in SaaS applications, more and more in the public cloud. What that's enabling these companies to do is focus more and more on application level security, because this sensitive data is being stored in applications, number one, but number two, this data is being moved around from, if you're in a hybrid cloud infrastructure, from public to private cloud. If you're in public cloud and multi-cloud, you're moving from various different public cloud vendors. So how do you get visibility? How do you get control into everything that's going on in sort of the application world? And that's also creating new categories of solutions that are focused on solving sort of the application security element. And we've seen that in the form of multiple companies, right? You know, a classic place for a lot of companies to start when it comes to applications is on the network side, on the firewall side. And of course, we've seen, you know, the creation of the next gen firewall, the app focused firewall, the API firewalls, the gateways. And so what's going to happen within the application realm is, of course, there's going to be a lot of focus around the networking aspect, the data movement aspect of applications, and the ability to gain data from applications, as well as almost everyone recognizes this theme of focusing on shifting left, moving into the development lifecycle of these companies, of these applications. And so, of course, we're seeing innovation there as well, which is creating categories of companies focused on key management, focused on source code, focused on scanning, all categories that have existed before. So that's a quick summary. Of course, we can spend the whole time during this call or during this conversation talking about more themes and more changes within the cybersecurity world created because of COVID. Now, one thing that we can talk on the thematic side. Now, one thing we can also talk about with regards to COVID is how is that changing the business of venture? How is that changing the business of being in a startup? And those things are all very fascinating, very fun topics to talk about as well, because we have multiple months of learnings behind us, and now a lot of clarity. So first of all, let's talk about how has COVID changed venture capital? A key one that a lot of people are talking about right now and focused on is, okay, how do we move from investing in entrepreneurs before in the real world, where we were able to meet people, have dinner with them, network with them, talk to them in person, and build these relationships in person, now to the digital world where everything's a video interview or a call. And, you know, that's been a sort of a source of uncomfort. You know, some VCs said something like, I'm just not going to do deals if I haven't met this founder before in person, or CEO in person. Some of them are realizing those same VCs are thinking, well, the world has changed, right? I mean, holy moly, like we might be working from home for, let's say, another year. We can't not make investments in great companies for the next year. And so overall, that's focusing a lot of VCs on how do they manage this dynamic, because at the end of the day, you know, when we invest in companies, we're getting married to them. The company's ups and downs, we're going through those ups and downs with them, alongside of them, and working towards helping them celebrate the ups as well as help them work through the downs as well. And if you don't have the ability to build these relationships and get to know these people in person, or build, you know, is it possible to build those relationships virtually? And so we're still on the cutting edge of figuring that part out, of building these relationships virtually via pure video interviews. What I will say is that I'm pretty optimistic that the world will get very comfortable with it. I'm still remembering the days fondly of chatting with my friends via AIM and building these relationships via AIM. And even though we might not spend a lot of time talking in school, we did spend a lot of time building these relationships over the digital world, and of course, that's created multiple social media platforms, including Facebook, which has allowed people to connect with others in the digital world from the very get-go and build these deep relationships. And so what that's creating is an opportunity. There's opportunity for companies out there to help the human race build relationships all digitally, all virtually, and to ultimately get to something as serious as a multi-million-dollar investment into your company. So that is how things have changed for VCs, and things that every VC is working through and thinking through and figuring out, and where multiple people have different bets, different thesis areas in terms of how they want to deal with that change in dynamic as well. Now, how has the world changed for startups because of COVID? This is a fun one as well. As everyone could probably imagine, the COVID has changed the perspective from the practitioner as well. And we'll talk about practitioner in a follow-up conversation later on in terms of how they're reacting to COVID. But the key one that a lot of folks were figuring out is, do CISOs and practitioners now have the capacity, resources, and time to figure out to work more on their security program in the context of a startup? And the answer is that uncertainty enough is enough in terms of creating risk on the vendor side and on the startup side. And as CISOs are figuring out their next steps, so are the vendors selling to those CISOs. What I'll say is that these vendors had to go through a lot of really interesting lessons learned over these past couple of months due to COVID. One really big one was figuring out the small business loans, especially when you're in the United States, as well as internationally. Every startup had, or every country was focused on trying to build those types of resources for their companies as well. And so figuring that out, that's something that's completely brand new. Not everyone knew exactly what the answer was in terms of whether or not it was a good thing or a bad thing, what the risks are. And so a lot of startups have been working towards figuring that out. And I think a big chunk of them have gotten to a good place. Now the next part is around how do we, what does the rest of our year look like? Are we going to be spending, how much do we need to change our projections? Can we change our projections up? Maybe COVID has changed the way that people think about security. Can we change? Do we keep our projections as is, or do we potentially change our projections down because people no longer have the time nor resources to work on this project that involves my solution or my startup? And so something that has been fun for us and proud for us is that because we are a security-focused fund, we've been able to help all of our startups figure out sort of the post-COVID, the through COVID journey. And I'm certain that a lot of startups have a very clear plan in terms of how they're going to tackle sort of these next couple of months to maybe even years, in terms of what they're figuring out within the economy. And I would say that what's the net of it? The net of it is that companies that are simply focused on back to the basics tend to be the luckier companies. They tend to have the opportunity to align well with a program that even in a low resources, even in a confusing time, are still high priority projects that need to be solved. And those are fundamental must-have back to the basics type problems that CISOs are solving. And as everyone could probably imagine, because of this transition to work from home, it's created a lot of focus and spend with regards to remote working type solutions. Things as simple as, for instance, a VPN as an example. Things as simple as Zoom, in terms of video communication and being able to work with each other. And so what we've seen is that companies that are well aligned to those work from home themes have benefited in the short term, and they will probably continue to benefit in the long term as the remote work theme continues on in this business continuity plan that every CISO is building for their company, as well as the many other shifts that are going on within the world. Alrighty, so yeah. Oh yeah, please, Matt. Please. I was
No.
just talking. I was just like, I don't know, this is Q&A. I'm just happy to keep on
Yeah.
going.
I mean, like, I thought it would be a presentation, and then every time I wanted to jump in, I was like, well, your questions are better than mine, so I was like, I would just like let you talk, you know. But that's pretty cool. You raise some interesting points, like one of them is the BCP, the business continuity plan. To be honest, that's something I've never heard about until a friend business got on fire last year, and I was like, oh, what's a BCP? He's like, oh, we have to do this. I was like, oh, interesting. And when the pandemic happened, he started to send a bunch of emails to a bunch of the investment he has made, like angel investment, to ask like for like BCPs to the startups. I was like, I'm pretty sure most of startups don't even know what's a BCP. You know, like they won't hire like Ernst & Young or Deloitte to give you like a BCP type of thing. You know, like what are the requirements around it. But so if I understood correctly, what you are saying is security is kind of like transitioning to be like risk focused to more like business continuity type of focus, where like, well, we just like kind of like what we have seen with WannaCry and NotPetya, where people are like, well, we don't always have a critical infrastructure, but does not mean that we want our business to shut down because it's also going to impact us and our employees. Do you think like the general focus, like the mainstream focus, is more understood if you tell them, well, cybersecurity is to make sure your business does not go down than an actual risk, like in terms of narrative, it resonates more? Or?
I think it's definitely it is a function that the CISOs have had that is more important, and it is a critical way of them being able to continuously communicate with their teams as well. So I wouldn't say that CISOs are becoming business continuity planners, of course, or focus more on risk. That's definitely an overall trend in terms of moving it towards risk, but not only business continuity, of course. Mm-hmm. But it is a function that CISOs were given in the past that just wasn't very much appreciated as a function, and now because of what's going on, is much more important.
I see. And another thing that you are mentioning is well, from a VC and for like startups, obviously a lot of like cybersecurity investment are like US centric, but now that everyone is remote, do you see more like startups having like distributed teams to kind of like, because like distributed teams is something that had been like mentioned quite a bit, like for instance like Automatic, like the WordPress companies have been doing like they're fully distributed. I think Buffer.io also, like they were like quite focused on distributed teams. I think that's something we're gonna see more like with startup in general, like also like with security. Is it like, how does that work for like VCs obviously, because I guess like the main focus was always the US, right? Like they would be like East Coast or West Coast companies. But now that you are mentioning, you still like conduct like interviews like on videos, otherwise it means you may not do any deal for 1 year. So how is it going like with that?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good question. In terms of building a team, that's what makes or breaks any company, startup, large company, and that team building process. Everyone has different experiences in terms of how they built their team, how they've made it successful, or failures that they've learned from that they want to avoid as well. And so, in terms of a trend towards moving towards more remote, I'd say that there's definitely more acceptance of it, and thus more people doing a remote workforce. The the key piece that will unlock more people to do more remote work or more remote hiring will be focused around how do they build a team engine. So team engine is how do you find the people? That's of course a really important one. How do you qualify them? Make sure that they're going to work well for your team's culture, your firm's culture, as well as this remote work world. How are you going to train them? Because everyone wants to get better at their job. And so how do you help them get better at their job, and how do you teach them? And that training component, that culture component, are the two really tough ones in the virtual work world that that not everyone has the confidence or the knowledge or the expertise in. And so the good thing is that that knowledge is being created by a set of core companies, and then that knowledge is being distributed as people move from company to company as well. And so overall, yes, there's definitely going to be more remote hiring in the future, and a lot of it being driven by both the knowledge component around creating comfort around it, as well as ability to make it successful. But then the second one, of course, is it's sort of mandatory. We sort of have to do it as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like from experience, like if you like source like remote people, it works better if they are senior or above. Because like if they are juniors, it's a bit more complicated to like kind of like to manage, or even for themselves for their growth. I guess I would say like the good thing about security is like since people have been on IRC since like the 90s, they're used to like talk communicate remotely. But I can see it can be a problem, for instance, for because you have like you know that better than me, but like since you have like companies at different stage, like when you need to focus more on the sales, or do your sales like remotely, without like interacting physically with customers, because I would think that if you're just in the building phase of your product or getting like initial customers, it's probably okay. But if you have to do like more sales, unless you're Zoom and then like people are just doing sales for you, it would be like more complicated.
Yeah. Sales is another really key one, and a lot of it comes. There's some similar themes to what we were just talking about with regards to hiring as well. And a big one is trust. And then the second one is, and how do you build trust in sort of the virtual world? It's just a different world overall. But then the second one is probability of success, right? How do we get comfortable that even if we were to do more in the remote work world and buy more vendors in the virtual world, how do we get comfortable that that this project will be successful? The nice thing about sales, though, is that sales has some alignment with sort of how consumers do sales. And so enterprise sales, a lot of enterprise sales have already happened in purely virtual world already. And so that evolution, I think there's enough lessons learned that almost everyone has some lessons learned that they can build a foundation off of and base the next decision off of. While the hiring a pure remote team is something that not everyone has experience in yet, and people need to build that comfort.
Yeah, I guess it will happen like at some point for like for security. Like so far, it was mainly like e-commerce or like like web platform. Security was a bit more tricky because it was always like enterprise sales oriented rather than B2C. But yeah, and actually I have another question, because a lot of people tend to forget a lot of VCs also have to do like a fundraising and to pitch to like LPs without mentioning any names, obviously. Like how did the COVID pandemic impacted like VCs trying to raise with LPs? Like what happened with VCs now? Because if we look at the stock market now, it makes like 0 sense. So it almost looks like that everyone is just like putting all their money in the stock market since everything crashed because of the Fed announcement. So has it been like impacting like VCs raising money from LPs or not yet?
Yes, yeah, it's definitely made an impact. Yeah, the best way to summarize it is it's very akin to how a customer purchases, how a CISO would purchase. Um, a lot of them still have as much budget as they had before, pre-COVID, but it's sort of just helping them think about, okay, how do I prioritize this? What am I going to do differently now because of this versus then? And because of that reprioritization effort, I think that's been the biggest impact to what LPs are doing. And also keeping in mind, there are many different categories of VCs as well, or LPs as well, and each of them are reacting to it in a slightly different way as well. And so what we can expect to happen is that some of those categories of LPs will probably be investing less in venture, maybe investing less in general. Some of them will be investing more. But because of that change, sort of we're reaching a new normal. And so as a investor of capital, we need to think closely in terms of how we know who are the LPs that are most positive around working with venture capital firm as well.
So would it be like family offices or like government like funds, like Fed powered like funds, like
Yeah, there are so many different types of capital. It's too early stages right now for me to tell you like definitively how each of the LPs are reacting to it. What I will say though is that every LP, there is of course the financial aspect to their investments, but then the other one is, if they have 3 to 5 different options and they all look equally great in terms of risk reward, how do they prioritize between those 3 to 5 options? And sometimes there's a mission component to it as well.
Yeah.
And so to your point around the government piece, right? I think there will be a lot of alignment with regards to government type funding towards helping venture capital, because venture capital invests in these small businesses that help grow the economy. I don't know if that's true. I don't have data to say that it's the case, but logically it makes sense.
And I mean, like similarly for like startups, when like VCs are investing now, like the amount of deals that happen like during Q2, like did it go down like significantly compared to like Q1, or is it kind of like not that significant? Because I also would assume that valuation of a lot of startups have been impacted because some VCs probably cannot do like follow-up rounds or things like that, right?
Yeah. I would probably, yes, I'd feel very comfortable saying that Q2 was probably impacted. If we do a year-over-year analysis when Q2 is done, and compare this year versus last year, the number of deals probably decreased. And because the number of deals probably decreased, then the total amount of investment that was deployed in Q2 probably decreased as well. We'll look at the data to see if that is true in the end. The thing to note though, and is that a lot of these decisions are made before an announcement. And so even though announcement is in the Q2, the decision or the dollars might have been made in Q1. And so the place where we should be really looking for how Q2 was impacted is by looking at Q3 data, versus Q2 data as well. But even so, I wouldn't be surprised if Q2 data, which yes is strongly driven by Q1 data or Q1 decisions, is impacted because of everything that has happened in Q2.
Yeah, that would make more sense. Yeah, because similarly, like startups really gonna have to adapt, and especially like if we look like over the past like 12, 24 months, like you would see like at some point, like I didn't know the difference between a seed round and a Series A because of the amount, you know. I was like, is this a seed round? Like it used to be a Series A, you know. So now I would assume like a lot of companies would have to cut on expenses. That's why I was asking the initial question about distributed teams, because a lot of startups now have been competing with like public companies to hire engineers, where, you know, if they would have a distributed team, even like if they would hire like people in Europe, that same engineer will probably cost like a fourth of that cost, you know. So it started to like be like a bit crazy for like startups to like do anything, even to be like US based, you know, and to do a team in the US, because you would need to raise like between $5 to $10 million just to start, just to like build your initial team, which was completely crazy before, even like 5 years ago. Like that was even like your Series A. So that's why I was asking initially about like distributed team, if you have seen any like changes or like strategy around it, because I do think that's probably like the way to go. But again, with security, because of like data and everything, like there's a bit of a different component to it. So I don't know if it's gonna happen as fast. But like we see it with Zoom, right? Like all the engineering team is in China, for instance, and they're a public company. So, but yeah, I guess we, like you said, you know, we'll probably see in Q3, like we can start to look a bit more about like the data and what people have been doing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think the to your point around hiring and the work towards figuring out remote has been something that people have been working on figuring out for a really long time. And so I think it's going to be a very natural component to every company's focus going forward, especially when you layer in the business continuity component to every company. And so I don't think only security teams will be hiring remotely. I think everyone will be hiring remotely.
Yeah.
And I think everyone's looking to figure that out. And, you know, of course, we'll see, you know, when it is safer for everyone to go back into offices and working like the way we did before. We will certainly see some companies that revert back to it. Perhaps they might have had a very negative experience with remote work and took those lessons learned and saying, oh, we're gonna double down on you know, being in office. And so everyone's going to have a different experience with this change, and take those lessons learned and make decisions as a result of it.
Or to quote George Kurtz on CNBC, when the interviewer was asking, he was like, well, what do you think about the stock? You know, do you think it's just gonna go up because everyone is working from home and that's it? And he was like, well, like what's happening now is like we'll never go back to what it was before. Like we are in a transformative like phase. Like a lot of people were telling me that whatever they plan to do, like for like their digital transformation, like that was planned for like 2 years, just happened like overnight. It was like, we're not going back to how we used to work before. So I guess there's a big question mark around it also.
Yeah, there's definitely a big question mark in terms of what the future will look like. But I would say that more and more people are getting comfortable and figuring out what the new normal looks like. It's less murky or vague as it was, you know, a month ago. And, you know, every day people are figuring it out. We're, you know, as a whole, people are very resilient, and, you know, we'll be able to figure out and generate new habits that are well aligned with this new way of working and aligned with this way of working around digital transformation.
Cool. Well, any last words to conclude? What would be your conclusion for that fabulous keynote without any slides? I was telling people, I was like, that's what happened when you receive like 10 slide deck a day. You know, you probably don't care about slides anymore. You realize they're useless.
Yeah. I mean, on my end, we are just always learning, right? And we constantly have these opportunities to learn from our portfolio companies. We have this opportunity to learn from our friends, from our fellow VCs, from customers. And, you know, as a part of it, a lot of this knowledge is always stored in our head. And the second it's put down on paper, it's going to be out of date in a very short while. So I'm happy to be able to sort of talk about key themes that we are seeing that are relevant in today's world.
Definitely. Well, thanks again for joining us and for accepting my invitation and to come and for coming to speak here. I really appreciate it. It was very interesting. Well, since it's live anyway, it's already up on YouTube, so people can, if you're just watching now, like you can just rewind and watch it. Well, thanks again, Will. And for those who didn't know Will, just go follow him on Twitter and LinkedIn. He's always posting a lot of very interesting stuff and making regular security tinker announcements in addition to his work. And he has been involved with a lot of thought leaders in security. By the way, when did you start Security Tinker? Is it 1 or 2 years ago? Or 3?
2 years ago.
2 years ago. So,
yeah.
So and in 2 years, he really managed to gather a lot of really good security talent. So very smart way of gathering intelligence on the industry, but at least he's getting a lot of data from really relevant people in the industry. So you should check out his profile for his analysis every time something comes out. Well, thanks again, Will. And,
thank you, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I always appreciate the opportunity to find ways to be helpful, to help others, and to share knowledge. And so, really, big kudos for what you've been building, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks to you too. Take care.
Take care.